Growing up in a small town, there was not a very large selection of restaurants, so we often had panzerottis at the local pizza place. Now what we're going to be making today is more of a calzone. A panzerotti is deep fried and a calzone is baked. So we're going to be using the same recipe that we used to make the pizza. Pizza, panzerottis, calzones, you can use the same type of dough for them. So we have our 2.5 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of sugar, 2.25 teaspoons of yeast, 1.25 cups of warm water, and 3 cups of flour. I'm using hard flour. We are going to start out with our standard yeast test. Add the yeast to the water should come alive. If it doesn't come alive, that's unfortunate. And now, to create our bread dough, we are going to combine our ingredients in a large mixing bowl. Our flour, our salt, our sugar, our oil, and of course, our water. Now that we have all of our ingredients combined into a singular mixing vessel, we can use a wooden spoon to mix said ingredients. Now this is one of those recipes that is easy to mix, so you just kind of run the spoon around a few times and it starts to kind of clump together. And once we have some serious clumpageness in our dough, it's time to use our hands. Now this dough is so easy to mix, you can probably just knead it right inside the bowl there. But I decided to do it on the counter. But first, a purification, using a cloth to cleanse the counter, and then a towel to dry it. Of course, now that our purification is done, we can continue on with what we were doing. So we'll take the dough, throw it on the countertop, and move it around with our hands, pushing firmly to knead the dough into its perfected state of amazingness. And once we're done doing that, you don't have to do it for very long. Put a little bit of oil in our bowl, and then we can stick our dough, give it a little bit of a covering, cover with a towel, throw it in the oven with the light bulb on, or a warm place, and we're going to let it rise for about an hour. Now, a wise thing to do would be to plan out your ingredients before you make your dough for your pizza, your panzerotti, or your calzone. But I failed to do that, and this is what I was able to turn up. I got some mozzarella cheese, a small onion, some mushrooms, and some salsa. I was considering using canned tuna with some black pepper, but I decided not to. I thought that might be a little bit on the weird side. I do have anchovies as well, but I do realize they're not very popular in many circles. But as far as ingredients goes in your pizza, you can kind of do whatever you want. If you like something, try it in a pizza. If it doesn't work, don't make it again. And if it does work, you're golden. And now that our toppings are all prepared, we can move on to the dividing of the dough. I think this will make 4 or so panzerottis, depending on the size of them, I guess. But I'm going to divide it into 3 pieces, and then later on I'm going to use the cutoffs to make a 4th one. But first, a little bit of flour on the table so that if I can stretch this out, it doesn't just stick. And then once we have our stuff divided, I'm just going to roll out one of these. Of course, you could use a rolling pin if you want, but I'm just going to do the old-fashioned hand press stretch method. You want to stretch it out to about the size of a medium pizza. And something to be aware of, it's that you don't want to go too thin or else the thing will fall apart. And you don't want to go too thick because then it's just a big dough ball. So get it as thin as you can before you can start kind of seeing through it. Now I'm using salsa here. I probably should have ran it through the blender first, the hand blender. But it's okay as is. And then a handful of the mushrooms, a handful of the onions, and a handful of the cheese. And as far as making these things go, you don't want to overfill them because we're just going to stretch our edges out and then we're going to cut off the edges, or the excess I should say. So kind of fold it over, work it in, and that way the thing won't separate, and then just use your cutting tool to trim the edges so there's not a giant amount of dough just sticking out past it. And I think that's kind of the best way to go about doing this. Of course, in more of a production setting, you'd use spoons and things to measure out your ingredients so that they're always kind of around the same size. And you would weigh out your dough so that you always have the right amount when you stretch it out so you don't have any excess like this. But for the home gamer, this is pretty good. We're making a couple of these, not 1,000. Turned out I didn't really prepare enough ingredients to make as many of these as I wanted to, so I just made 2 of them, and then I put the rest of the dough in the refrigerator to use at a later date. I think the dough stays good for probably about a week. And like I said before, I mean, you can make pizzas, panzerottis, calzones, any of that type of stuff using the same type of dough, so it's quite useful that way. This also works good to help with portion control. And now we're just gonna throw the whole thing in the oven, and we're gonna bake this. I baked mine at 350 degrees for 20 minutes, and then I flipped it, and then I baked it for another 10 or so. But your best bet, your best way of cooking this is to use your pizza stone. Preheat your oven nice and hot, 450, 500, and then bake it kind of the same with flipping it, but your times will be drastically reduced. It might only be like 5 minutes. And now we're back to the start of the video where our calzone is done. So let me know in the comments below how you like to make your calzones, or if you're a big fan of panzerottis like I am. And if you like this video and would like to see more of it, please like and subscribe. And until next time, stay awesome.